And I'll start sharing screen too. Okay, so we are diving into CSS this week, as I said. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and break down that name just a little bit. Style sheet is something that you guys have probably used if you used Microsoft Word or any of the equivalents. It's simply where you save a style so that you can reuse it. So you come up with a style for a heading or a paragraph or an unordered list or something, and you say, well, I like that. I want to maintain my hierarchy. I want to use that elsewhere in the same document. So instead of having to remember everything that you did, you save it as a style, and then you apply the style to something else. That's only half the power of style sheets. The other half is that you can update a style sheet, and it's got inheritance. So all of the elements that have that style sheet applied to them, you can think of those as instances with their own content, and then those will update as well, which really helps with efficiency. That's the style sheet part of it. The cascade is something that's much more magnificent that they built into style sheets for the web. I think because they realized there were different ways that you could apply style sheets to an HTML document. There's an inline style where you have an actual style attribute that you can put on an element. There's a style element itself, which we looked at before in Unit 1. We have put it up in the head, style, and then close style tag, and then you put CSS in the middle of it there. And then you can also have an outboard CSS, an external CSS document that you save into a style subfolder or something like that. So what happens if you have two different rules that are battling each other? So in one CSS document, I say I want the paragraph text to be red. You wouldn't want to do that except for like an error message or something. But yeah, I want the text to be red here. And then in a different style sheet, I tell it I want it to be blue. Which one wins? So they had to establish rules for that right off the bat. And that, I think, is where the concept of the cascade comes from. It's basically a system of what's called specificity, which means that if you do have conflicting styles or conflicting rules on a particular element, then there are rules for how which one is going to win out, which one is going to overrule the other one. So that's what the cascade basically means at its core. On the largest level, it simply means that we can apply style sheets to a document and it will overrule the style sheets that have been added by the client, which is the browser, right? So the browser formats documents very, very simply, but it does format them. If we want to change the way the website page looks, then we apply a style sheet and our style sheet overrides theirs, but only where there's a conflict. The cascade is beginning there. For different kinds of style sheets that we might make, an internal style sheet will always override an external style sheet. So if you've got like an external CSS document that says, I want the paragraph to be red, and then you've got a style element inside the HTML that says, I want the paragraph to be blue, the interior one will override the exterior one, always. That's considered to be something where, an external style sheet is what you use to style multiple pages, right? You can apply that style sheet to your entire website, right? Your whole directory. And then maybe on one page you want to override it, like the home page. Yeah, I want the home page to look a little different from the interior pages, which is usual. And then you could do that by then having a style sheet inside the HTML document that overrides the other one. And then on that page, you say, okay, so I want the paragraphs blue, but maybe the paragraph inside the footer, I want that to be green. I don't know why. So then I could put a style attribute inside that one paragraph element, like p style equals, and then put CSS inside the quotes. And then that would override both of those. That would override the page style and it would override the site style as well. Now, that's not to say that you should do that. That's just the kind of, other than us overriding the user agent style sheet or the client style sheet, that's the top level of the cascade, is interior versus exterior, inline styles versus style elements, those kinds of things. Going on from there, it goes further. The cascade specificity applies to different kinds of selectors that you can use. You don't know what I'm talking about yet, but we'll know in just a bit. Where like if within a single rule, if you have like color red and color blue within the same block, whichever one comes last will override the one that comes before that, and so on and so forth. But different kinds of selectors is the main thing that we'll deal with. So what is a selector? So every style rule consists of two parts. There's a selector, and then there's the rule itself, consisting of declarations. The selector is where you tell the CSS style sheet what element you want to format on the page. I want to format all paragraphs, or I want to format the one element that has a class of tagline on it, or I want to format the one element that has an ID of site ID on it, whatever. That's the selector. And then the rule inside the braces is the formatting changes that you want to make to that selector. So those consist of property and value pairs. So the property, I want to change color property, and I want to change it to red, for instance. So this is one of the trickier things, I think, to get a hold of, get a handle on when you start doing CSS. What the heck is this cascade? So what is specificity? What in the world? I just thought of this just now. It's something we used to look at. And let me see if I can find it real quick here. If I can't, then I won't waste your time. But someone did an infographic, a specificity CSS Sith levels, about different levels of Sith characters in...
Sith?
Yeah, Sith, like Star Wars. And yeah, I can't find it right now. So I will find... Oh, wait, here it is. I see the image there. So this is an article about specificity. This is, by the way, Smashing Magazine, which is a fantastic resource for all things to do with web, not only coding, but style, interface design considerations, just all kinds of stuff. And here we go. So the Sith levels down here, if you go to this image here. I'll go ahead and put this link into... Okay, yeah, this is the original article here. Archived without styles. Okay, stuffanddnonsense.co.uk. And the infographic here is a little bit too large to read on here, but I'll link to either this or the Smashing Magazine. But basically what it's talking about is different kinds of selectors and which one will override which one and how much they're worth and so on. So I won't go any further into this right now. Let's just go ahead and start applying some of this stuff. So without further ado, let me take a look at my root folder here. So what I've done here, what I recommend that you do, although you don't have to, you can keep working on the same file if you want to, but last time we worked on this file was Unit 2, right? And we had, okay, so there's my Vispo CH3, which is what you guys submitted, your last name, and then CH3. So what I did is I duplicated that document, and I created a Unit 4 folder, and I've got this, and I'm now going to rename it. Just to my last name and CH4 instead, since we're doing chapter 4. That's totally up to you. I tend to be paranoid, I'm constantly duplicating my directories just in case I do something to flub things up, and I wish I could get back to the original. By the way, that's not the right way to do that. The right way to do that is start working with Git. But that can be a little bit more trouble than I want to deal with sometimes. So I often just duplicate folders, and that's what I'm doing here. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or if you want to just keep working in the same directory. It's up to you. But in any case, rename it, right? Because when you submit it this time, you're going to submit it as CH4 and not CH3. Otherwise, I'll get really confused when you're turning stuff in. I won't know what I'm looking at. Okay, so here is this, and then here is our index. Recall we've got this. We created some placeholder pages for these three speakers. We created links back and forth between them, relative pathway links as they're called, and we have created a little miniature local site by doing so. We've got a resources subfolder. Recall that this is stuff that you may use with, in the creation of the web document, but there are not assets that are going to be put in there upon upload or serving or what have you. And then images and media files and so on, you always want to tuck into a subfolder. Images, assets, media, something like that. Usually if it's just images, it'll just be called images like this. And there's a couple that we haven't used so far. In fact, we've only used 3 so far. Today we're going to use the logo. I'm going to show you how I recommend getting it into a web page, not the way the textbook does it. And then this favicon.ico here. which is, well, we'll take a look at that first. So this is what we're starting with. So everybody take a moment and make sure that you've got your folder open and ready to go, and that you've got your coding environment ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and open up index in here. Although instead of opening the file, I'm going to open a folder. Where are we at here? Unit 4. There we go. I'm going to open this whole folder. And the reason for that is because I'm kind of testing out this Go Live, which is this live preview that we were talking about. Well, that brings me to another one, by the way. Someone was asking last week, well, why did you use a separate figure for each of these 3 images? Why don't you use one figure and then put all the images into that one figure? And I said, well, I don't know about what's the best practices considerations on that. So I did look that up for just 5 to 10 minutes or so, and turns out, yeah, it's perfectly fine to put them into a single figure element. For best practices, if you do put several images into the same figure, they should be related to each other. The images should be related to each other directly. And in this case, that would be perfectly appropriate because these are definitely all related to each other, right? They're all guest speakers for this season. So they're definitely related, and they can go into a single figure. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine the way it is for right now because I might want to format these guys separately using CSS. And so let's see. I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder inside of here. If you're just in the Microsoft Windows, then of course you can do it there. Make a new folder and call this styles. So your CSS is going to go into a subfolder that's usually either called CSS or styles, one of the two. I usually use CSS actually, but the textbook uses styles. Whichever one you want to use is fine. Just remember what it was. And I'm going to make a new document. And this time it's going to be a CSS document. And I'm going to save this into styles, and let's call this, let's see, what does the textbook like to call it? Main.css, which is one of the more popular names for this. Why be concerned about what the name is? Well, you may be working with multiple CSS documents. For right now, we're just going to be dealing with one, at least one locally. But yeah, you might have like a main.css, then you might have another CSS for desktop layouts called desktop, and then it's one for wide layouts called wide, or maybe another one for tablets. I don't know. Might be you have any number of CSS files, if it makes sense to keep them kind of modularized like that. So main.css, I usually call mine default.css, but main makes just as much sense. You can choose either one. But whichever one you do, just remember what it is. Save it. Save into styles. And we got both of these guys open here. And at this point, I'm going to get that live server going. I'm just kind of playing around with it here. So this is it. Which one was it? I went to, yeah, the live preview. Host a local server in your workspace, blah, blah, blah. That's the one we were looking at last week. So I did that, and then you go to go live down here. Starting, and then it opens this up in the browser, and notice it's got the IP address / index. It doesn't have the / file protocol. And so this is now live. I do need to save the document in code in order for the changes to appear here, but I'll get used to that. I did use one once upon a time, but I just haven't in a long time. So that is that. And let's go ahead and talk about some link elements here. So the first thing I'm going to do, these are going to be a few link elements, and the very first thing I want to do is take a look at using that favicon.ico, which is a way of getting a little thumbnail image into your browser tab, like over here, right? I guess, yeah, actually I don't have any experience working with this with Edge and these vertical tabs here. But instead of just showing like a blank page here, the image here should show in place of that when we do the favicon.ico. So let's go ahead and do that. So after the title in the head element, let's make our first link. And this is rel equals, I'm not used to that yet. Shortcut icon. I got to change the way this thing works. And then href equals, and this is what you have for the link elements. You have the rel relationship, and then you have the href, which is the hyperreference. It's making a reference to some other document. And the one we're going to reference here is images / and then there's the favicon.ico, and like so. So as a reminder, this one just shows the empty page over here. When I save this, it should show up with our custom one. There it is. It's now got the little, I don't know if those are tools. Oh no, it's a TH something. I don't know. They tend to be like really, really little images, and they're not especially clear, but they can help with branding. Instead of having the empty document up there, you can show with that instead. So that's the first link. That's kind of the simplest one. The remainder links, we're going to go 2 more. And those are both going to be calling a CSS file. So let's make another one here. And this one's going to be style sheet. So whenever you're calling in a CSS document, it's going to be rel equals style sheet. So relationship is this, okay, this thing's a style sheet. And then href again. And this time, let's go ahead and just close that without putting anything into a hyperreference. I want to take you to a place where we're going to grab something called normalize.css. And what that is a way of taking the formatting out of the document before we get started with it. So let me explain what I mean by that. I'm going to pop back over to the browser here. This page, it looks like an unformatted page to someone who's done CSS and done a lot of web formatting and so on. It's just like, yeah, this is an unstyled document. But actually, that's not true. This document does have formatting in it. The H2 is larger than paragraph, right? It's a larger font size and it's bolded. That's formatting. It's got extra space around it, right? There's space in between the H2 and the H3. That's formatting. The sup element, right? The superscript that we use to push the TH up, well, guess what? That's formatting. It's taking the TH, it's making it a little smaller, and it's pushing the baseline up. It's putting dots on the unordered list, and it's indenting the whole thing. It's indenting the figures. It's indenting the block list. So these, and even the links, like it's making the link blue and giving it an underline. Those are all formatting things. That is the user agent style sheet. So that's the browser putting that stuff on. So when we do a normalize, what that's meant to do is clear a lot of that stuff out. It doesn't clear everything out. Although I've seen some pretty large reset.css files that really reduce it down to what it looks like a plain text document instead. But normalize.css is just going to take out some of the stuff that's, I don't know, might get in our way so that without it we can more easily apply our own stuff. So let's go, I'm going to go over to the classroom stream here, and you guys should do the same, okay? So pop over to the, or not the classroom stream, but just the classroom and the classwork. And let's go back up to the useful links for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery up here. And what I've added to it is the normalize.css. So this is in a code distribution network called CDN.js. And CDN.js is, I think, the biggest one out there other than like GitHub or something like that. And it'll host almost all of the CSS and JavaScript libraries that you might be aware of and that you might want to use at some point. You can't just get your own library hosted up there. It has to be one that's in common use, and eventually they'll go ahead and throw it up there. So like when we start doing jQuery towards the end of the semester, will get the link to jQuery library from CDNJS. And if you want to know where anything else, like, yeah, I heard about this cool JavaScript library called Lodash and I want to use it. How do I get it? Well, you'd probably just open up Google and just type in Lodash CDNJS and it'll give you a link to the library. So let me go ahead and pop open this link. It looks like this. This is CDNJS. And if they've got something available for a particular library, they'll give you these links down here. So you can copy the entire link element, which is this guy right here, copy link tag, but we've already got a link tag here, right? We've already built this thing, so I don't need the whole link tag. I just need the URL without the link tag, which is this guy right here. So yeah, you can call in a CSS style sheet from online somewhere remotely, and that's perfectly fine. It's not necessarily recommended for production environment because you never know if your connection to that external or that outboard, not the outboard, but the remote link is going to work. So at that point, it's usually recommended to go ahead and get all that stuff installed on your own directory system. But for now, for when we're in development environment, this is perfectly fine. And it kind of keeps from cluttering up too many files, in your own directory. So what is all these guys? I'm not even going to go into the map thing, but the normalize.min.css, normalize.css, I know you guys have done coding. I don't know to what extent you've seen minified files and prettified files. Let's go ahead and open these up one at a time. I'm going to take the regular one first, normalize.css. I'm going to copy just the URL, and I'm going to open up a new tab and just paste the URL in there and hit enter, and it'll show you the code, right? So the browser will do this for you on a CSS or JS document. So there it is. This is just a series of CSS formatting rules that's intended to zero out or reset most of the stuff that the browser is putting onto your page. Let me go back here, and now I'm going to copy the minified version, normalize.min.css, and open up another tab still and paste that in, and that's what it looks like. This is the same code as the last one that we were just looking at, this guy here. This one here is the same code because the white space doesn't matter for most of it, right? So you can crunch it all down. And so this winds up being slightly more performant because it's got less white space. It means it can be read more easily. JavaScript minified files can get crunched down a lot further because all the verbose variable names and identifiers that we use wind up getting reduced down to like single letter variables and things like that. So those guys get crunched down really hard. But this is still, you can get the idea about what this is. So which one should you use? Well, like we're in development right now, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. For most live production environments, I don't think it matters much either, frankly. There's some people who would not appreciate me saying that, but I don't think it matters much. Once you get up into like the potentially tens of thousands of visitors a day, then yeah, okay, maybe the performance knock might start to be noticeable at that point. But before then, I don't think it matters much. Grab whichever one you want to. I'm going to grab, well, let me go ahead and close the tabs here. I'm going back to normalize, and I'll just grab the regular one, normalize.css. Like I said, it doesn't matter. Copy the URL of whichever one you choose. And let's go back to the coding environment here and get in between the quotes of the href attribute and paste in your value. And before I save, let's see, I guess I don't need this anymore. There we are. So I just want to see what kind of difference this makes. So right now it's got all the spacing in there and so forth. Let's see how much it does, if anything. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then when I go back to the browser, yeah, it didn't do much. I mean, it still got the spacing between the paragraphs and the headings and so on, but it did take off the margin. So the body element has a margin applied to it by the browser automatically, and it took that out for us. And
Mr. Baseball, can you do that one more time?
Do what?
Where you grab the link and post it on.
Oh, yeah. So let's see. I just closed CDNJS. So, oh, actually, let's see. I gave you guys a link, didn't I? So going to useful links for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and classroom materials, and then grab this normalize link here, and then grab either one of these URLs. Doesn't really matter which one, normalize.min or just the normalize. And click on copy URL, and then go back over here and paste it into the href of that link element that we coded in.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, this is something that gets done quite a lot in web development, is working with CDN. And CDN.js is one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest. Let's see, let's go back over here. There we go. So it just knocked the margin off the body pretty much. I didn't see anything else it did, but it's worthwhile to know that that's not a bad place to start from. It's just to grab and normalize. And there are all kinds of other ones out there too. There's various reset.css. You can make your own reset.css. I tend to do, or a lot of people actually tend to do a very simple one where you just take all the margin and padding off of everything. And that's just a couple of lines of code, and you can go ahead and start with that. That's a little more extreme than this one. Now let's go ahead and get our own style sheet in here finally. We created the main.css. If you haven't, then create it and save it into the style subfolder. And we'll do one more link element here. Rel equals style sheet. And href equals, and this one is going to be into styles and main.css. And that's not going to make any difference right now because we haven't put anything in there. But this is what your head element should look like at this point. If you want to, you can group these together, like all the link elements together. At some point, we'll start putting script elements underneath here, and you could group those together if you want to. It just depends. It's your own coding style, whatever you choose to do. Okay, so let's go hop over to main.css. And I'm going to put in a comment here first to start with. First of all, I like to put a comment up at the top of the page. Sometimes with several of these. And I know you guys have done C++, so the comments are going to be just like multi-line comments in C-based languages. There is no
Not everybody.
I'm sorry?
Not everyone's done C++.
Oh, you haven't yet? Okay, cool. Well, here you go. This is a multi-line comment in C-based languages. Would look like this without the extra, like this. C-based languages also have a single line comment, usually multiple different ways of doing it, but CSS does not have a single line comment. All comments are done just like this, except if you want to, you can do like I do and add in extra of those asterisks for emphasis. So I like to leave myself a lot of, what was it someone called it last week? Well, basically just leaving comments everywhere, including like the name of the document. It's not like I can't see it right here, but I don't know, sometimes it's nice just to have that up there. So I'm going to do another comment here, and let's talk about some of the style formatting rules that we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to be dealing just with type formatting today. That's where you always want to start, is type formatting, and then on Thursday we'll get into box model, which is like padding and margins and backgrounds and borders and a little bit of very basic layout stuff, and then we'll move on from there. But type formatting is the place to start from. It's some of the oldest CSS rules and some of the easiest to see the difference that it's making in your page immediately. So these are some of the type formatting rules, and they basically fall into three categories. There are the font properties, and there are the text properties, and then there are a couple of miscellaneous ones that you should know about as well. So the font properties first. If you want to change the typeface that's being used, it's font family. Notice the hyphens. Almost always when you have two words being smashed into one, use a hyphen for those. And CSS for the naming for your HTML for your file names as well, those kinds of things. It's basically the only places where you can. I don't know a single like functional or procedural scripting language that allows you to use hyphens in identifiers, except HTTP, HTML, CSS, those kinds of things. Let's see, font size property. If you want to change the size of something, there's various ways you can do that. There you can set something based off of pixels. You can do something based off of ems, which is related to the size of the type. You can use percentages, which will relate it back to like the default size. What percentage of that do you want to use? You can even use things like inches and centimeters and so on. I don't know why you would ever want to unless you were doing a style sheet for a print document, which does happen sometimes. But yeah, there's various ways that you can do that. We'll be dealing with pixels and percents, I think, and I don't know, maybe I'll do ems at some point here, but probably percentages to start out with. I think that's probably the easiest one, other than pixels, and pixels can lead to their own problems. There's font style. That's if you want text to be italic. So it can either be italic or normal. So why would you ever want to use normal? Well, sometimes you set italic for something and then you want to override that just for one specific element. You might want to make that normal. In addition, there is some text that is italic by default, like the emphasis element, and you might want to change that back to non-italic, and then that would be the normal. There's font weight, and that is for bold text. And there's another one, font variant. I don't think we're going to use that one. There's also a font property, which is kind of a shorthand where you can combine all these guys into one declaration. I'll show you guys how that works. So these are some of the font properties. The text properties that you're going to be using most are going to be text align. So if you want to align your text left, center, right, justify. Let's see, there's text indent. That's if you want to do a first line indent on a paragraph. Text transform. This is how you do something in uppercase if you want to. And that should let you know, basically, anytime you can do something in CSS, you don't want to do it in your HTML or your content. Because that lets you know, yeah, this is considered a formatting thing and not a content thing. So if you ever, for instance, get text from a client that includes some words in all uppercase, you would want to edit that and change them back to lowercase and simply use text transform in CSS to turn them uppercase. It's more agile, it's more flexible. If they ever do want to show that content without those words being uppercase, then it'll be able to be changed in the CSS. So I'm harping on this now because I know that at some point some of you will turn in some HTML and it will have all uppercase in it, and I will encourage you gently to not do that anymore. So these are the three text
Font property needs a dash, doesn't it?
Say where?
Font property needs a dash, doesn't it?
No, because it's just font, actually.
Ah.
So, but good catch, definitely. A couple of other ones that we'll use, we'll definitely use color. That's one of the big ones. Why is it not font color or text color? As we'll see on Thursday, when you apply a color property to an element, it changes not only the font color, but also if you have a border, it changes the border color as well. Now, there's a separate border color property that you can use to override that if you need to. But anyway, that's why it's color and not text color or font color. There's another one. I don't think we're going to be using it right away, but we might at some point. Column count. If you want to take a big block of text and format it into like 3 columns or something like that, then there's a very simple column count in CSS3. You can't imagine some of the hoops that we had to jump through before CSS3 came along to get something like that working. Now it's a piece of cake. It's a single line of code. So these are the ones that we're likely to use. Probably, oh, you know what? I'm going to put one more in here underneath the miscellaneous here. List style or list style type sometimes. And this is specifically for lists, like unordered lists, ordered lists. If you want to change the little bullet point into something else, then you can, or if you want to get rid of it, you can, that sort of thing. In fact, let me go ahead and just do list style here, because sometimes you do list style image and things like that. Okay, so all of this stuff, if you've been typing this in along with me, it should definitely be in a multi-line comment here so that you don't mess up any of the code after that, because without putting in the colon and semicolon, the stuff will all break the page. Okay, let's go ahead and get formatting on our document here. So the first thing that I want to do is let's format the header first. Now, it's a good idea when you're doing CSS to try to organize it as much as possible. That's something that took me a while to catch on to, because organization is not my strong suit. Never has been, never will be. And so eventually I got in the habit of kind of organizing things and then commenting the different sections here. Now, exactly how you organize your CSS, it's up to you. Some people do it by specificity. I used to do that too. These days, I tend to do it kind of like this. I say, okay, well, I'm going to put my header stuff in here, and then later on, I'm going to be doing like format main and footer, so something like that for the next section. And then maybe after that, I will do like body copy or something like that. So this is now what makes the most sense to me. But again, if something else makes more sense to you, if you organize things a different way, if your brain works differently, then absolutely go ahead and organize it differently. All I ask is that it be organized some way or another, and that it be commented so that I know how it's organized. Because I think this is kind of critical. If you're working on a team, if you're working with other professionals, then they're going to want that too. They're not going to want to have to sit there and comb through all your code trying to figure out how you structured it, if you have it all. So just get in the habit, however you want to do it, is come up with these commented sections and then kind of try to start organizing your CSS that way. It may take a while to figure out how you like to do it. So let's go ahead and do the header H2 and the header H3. So let me take a look at the HTML. What I'm talking about is the stuff that's in the header here, the H2 and the H3 right here. This is the stuff that's up at the top of the page. I think of this as being the website name, probably something that appears on every page, and then probably this is their tagline for this year, and that's going to show up on every page too. So I could do a selector of just H2, and let's go ahead and do this. So you do, the first thing is that you do the selector. You tell what element on the page you want to select for. And then you put a pair of curly braces as if you're building, you know, an object in JavaScript or something like that. And your declarations go in here. So it's not a bad idea just to do something really simple to start with, just to test it, just to see, hey, is this CSS page working at all? Can I get something happening here? And what I usually like to do that is just do what I just told you would never want to do, except for an error message, and just do like color red. So for colors, you can do English-based colors. There's like, I don't know, like 150 odd of them available, or you can do hexadecimals, or you can do RGB values. I'm going to show you the other two as well. So let me just save. I just want to see if it's working. Save this. I'm going to pop over to the browser and go back over here. Okay, so it did make the text red. It also took these guys and made them red. I was forgetting that I've got more than one H2 on the page. There's two H2s inside the main element as well, so it grabbed those. So how do I grab that one H2 without grabbing the other ones? Let's look at the CSS, or the HTML again, rather. So here's the H2. It's inside header, right? Here's the second H2 inside main, and the other one's inside main as well. So I want to grab the one that's just inside the header. So here's one way to do that. Instead of just selecting for H2, I use a compound selector. There's various kinds of compound selectors, but one of them, you have the element, and preceding that, you have an ancestor element. I almost said the parent element, but it could actually be any element on up the stack that the H2 is inside. So this says, select for the H2 that's inside the header, which is, of course, this one inside the header. So I'm going to save that and pop over to the browser. And there, look at that. It just does that one H2, and now it's leaving the other two alone. So that's one way to do it. I might not want to do it that way personally because this may not be the only header on a page. You might very well have another header inside the main element and then another H2 inside of that header. And if that's what happens, then I will once again have my formatting on some element that I don't want. Now, we don't happen to be doing it this way, but that could easily happen. You can have headers inside other sectioning elements. So another way to do it is to take this H2 and to give it a name, to give it some kind of identifier that we can grab onto using the style sheet, a different kind of selector. So there are a couple of different ways of naming things and in HTML. There's a few actually, but the two that are most commonly used are ID and class. So ID is a way of naming something if you want it to have a unique name on that page. So like if I call this name equals unique or something, then I wouldn't be able to have any other name equals unique anywhere on here. And that's what I want to do in this case. I want this H2 to be singular, right? I want to format this H2 without formatting any of the other H2s. And so what that is an ID attribute. And this guy right here, as I was saying, this is the logo, right? This is the identification for the website that we're on. So what you'll usually see is site ID, like this. ID equals site ID into the quotes. Note the hyphen there. There are people who do it like this. There are even people who do it like this. I don't really approve of the camel casing in HTML or HTTP, but you do see it that way sometimes. I recommend doing it this way with the hyphen delimiter. So this now has an ID. This has a unique name on it that we can select for in our CSS. So let's go back over here, and instead of header H2, let's do hash site ID. Not forgetting to put the hyphen in if you put it into the HTML identifier. So that's how you select for something with an ID, is simply by using the hash site ID. So let's save that, and I go over to the browser and I look, and hey, it's working, cool. It's selecting for that one H2 and none of the other ones.
You could literally call that site ID anything you wanted to. You could call it Bob's Big Boy. And as long as you called it the same, it would be still...
That is correct.
Okay.
Let's try it. Bob's Big Boy. I haven't seen one of those for a while.
Let's get dated.
Okay, so now if I go back over here, it breaks. But if I call it Bob's Big Boy, and there it is, it's working. So yes, you can call it anything you want to, as long as they match. I'm going to keep site ID just for fun. Oops. There we go. Okay, cool. It's working. So we can do the same thing for the H3 here. We do have H3s inside of the main element. So we can do the same two things here. If we wanted to format this guy here, we could do the header H3 and format it that way. And I'll add the color red on here as well. Let's do something different. Let's do green just to see how horrific that looks. There it is. Actually, it looks better than the red. Or we could go into our HTML and we could give this an ID, right? And you could do like ID equals tagline. I guess I'll go ahead and be consistent here. I think tagline is close enough to being one word that you can just do it like that. In fact, it may actually be one line, one word in the dictionary at this point, so I'm going to stick with that. And so instead of header H3, we can do hash tagline. And go over to the browser, and it still works.
So quick question for you. That semicolon at the end, technically because this one right here is not the last statement in the bracket, do you actually need that semicolon?
I've certainly had things break without it. I think that you could do, if this was like literally the last declaration on the page, then I think that can work. This one here, I would worry about taking out. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like it's still working.
So I think when you're really going to run into the issue is when you have multiple statements within that line. So you always want to have a semicolon separating a different
Right. If we did like font
aspect of design,
and
right?
family and italicized it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that breaks both, certainly, if we put them both into one. Neither one got read. Yeah, I tend to put it in there in any case, even if it's the last one, but it looks like you don't need to. Okay, so enough of these colors. Let's get rid of those things because we don't need them. And let's do something maybe a little more useful with these site ID and tagline. So site ID, and let's do font size. In fact, you know what? Before we do any of these things, let's go ahead and make a rule for the body element. You can format the body element. In fact, you can even format the HTML element, the root element, if you want to. Even though technically the HTML element is not visible, it kind of is at the same time. So I'm going to select for the body here, and let's give it a font family and a font size. So I'm going to do font family, and let's try these. And I can't remember if we talked about this at all in Unit 1. But what this is here, it's giving me what are called font stacks or font lists. And I'm going to choose this one that says Georgia times New Roman times serif. And the comma separators here. And so here's what this means, basically. Until @FontFace came along in CSS3, maybe a decade ago or less, the only fonts that the user could see were either fonts that you had turned into an image and actually placed into your HTML page as an image, or fonts that existed on their machine. So if you were on a fancy Mac and you had some cool font like Optima Nova on there or something like that, and you thought, ooh, cool, this looks really good on my web page, I'm going to make the typeface, I'm going to set it all on Optima Nova. And it would all look wonderful on your machine, and you'd go put it up online, and no one else would see that font because they didn't have it on their machines. So their machine would try to figure out, okay, this is a sans serif font, I think. Okay, so the closest thing I've got to that is Arial, so I'm going to go ahead and put it on there. So you're seeing this one beautiful design, and everyone else is seeing this hatchet job because they don't have the font that you wanted. So what this is, this font stack, is it offers the web page a list of fonts to look for on the user's machine. When you see a list of fonts or a stack of fonts separated by commas, it's telling the browser, okay, on the user's machine, look for a font called Georgia. If they've got one, then supply that. If they don't have this one, then use Times New Roman. If they don't have that, some machine have something called Times instead, use that. And if you don't have any of these guys available, then just grab whatever is the default serif font on the user's machine. Now these days we do have @FontFace, which basically means that if you have a web font, you can store it on your web server, and then when the user downloads the page, they also download the font at the same time so that they can then see your page the way that you wanted it to be. It's very handy
Google
stuff.
fonts, right?
What's that?
The Google fonts?
Yes, you can use Google Fonts. That's the big one. There's also Font Squirrel, various other services. The ones that I've used the most are Google Fonts and Font Squirrel. But like that wasn't even a thing a decade ago until @FontFace came along, or maybe a little over a decade. But yeah, until that came along, that wasn't even a thing. You could only use the fonts that were on the user's machine. So even if I were using my own custom font that was called, I don't know, Blaha, something like that, you still might put like a short stack after that one in case Blaha, like in case the user came up with a really old browser that couldn't handle @FontFace or something, then it would still look for the next one in line and supply that. So this is the font stacks that are being offered by code here. I think I can shorten this a little bit at this point. In the days of @FontFace and so on, I think that I can just go Georgia serif. And if the user doesn't have Georgia on their machine, whatever is the default serif, which will probably wind up being Times or Times New Roman anyway. So if I save that and go over here, there we go. Back in the day when we had like 6 or maybe 8 web-safe fonts, as they were called, you would definitely want to use Georgia instead of Times if you could, because Georgia was designed for reading on on the screen through pixels. Times was not. That was designed as a print font. It doesn't work particularly well on screen. Georgia does. Same thing if you're using sans serif, you'd probably want to go with Verdana instead of just Arial or something like that. Okay, so notice that when we changed the font family of Georgia to the page, to the body element, it changed all of the text inside of that. That's something we actually talked a little bit about on last Thursday or Friday or something like that. It's inherited. Most of the font properties that we're going to be using are inherited properties. In fact, the font properties might all be inherited. I'm not sure. Some properties are inherited, which means they do something like this, where if you give this font property or font family property to the body, all of the elements inside of there will also have that font property applied to them. Other properties are not inherited. Like when we start adding margins and borders onto things, those are not going to be inherited by children elements. Thank goodness. That would be a huge mess. But most of the type formatting stuff is for good reason. And this is kind of a zeroing thing. Let's do font size here 100%, which means just 100% of the default web size, or font size, which should be 16 pixels. And we go over here, and yeah, it doesn't change anything. It's just kind of telling everyone to stay where it is, but then it'll make it easier for us to kind of base size differences off of this by using other percentages. It's kind of a way for us to think of it in terms of percentages instead of anything else. So we did body. Let's go ahead and put something into those headers now. So let's say I want the site ID to have a font size, and I want it based off of this guy. Remember, this is the big H2 at the top of the page. And I'm going to do font size 170%. This is going to be my big type here. So if I go over here and refresh, and it doesn't make any difference. Let me make sure something's happening here. If long enough goes by without me being able to see a difference, then I want to do something drastic, and yep, there we go. So things are working. So 170% is just what the H1 is doing anyway, or sorry, the H2. So that's fine. Let's see if there's anything else we want to do. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and do a text indent on this, which is going to push it away from the wall here. And the reason why might not be readily apparent at first, but what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the H2 and H3 and I'm going to be pushing them to the right in order to make room for the logo that we're going to put as a background image there. So let's do a text indent here. And I think it comes out to 80px. Let me pop over to this guy right here and take a look at our logo. Yeah, let's see, what do I do? Do I go to properties here? Where's it at? Really? You're not going to tell me the...
Maybe details?
Yeah, let's check there. All right, there. So yeah, 88 pixels by 80 pixels. So that's why I picked 80. So that's right then. So let's give it a text indent of 80 pixels. And over in the browser here, shoves that over. I'm also going to do that to the tagline here. Let's give the tagline a font size, and we'll make this one a bit smaller. This one's going to be 130%. And I wonder if that's just going to leave it the same. Now that one did make it a slightly larger. And let's do a text indent of that in the same amount here, 80px. Push that guy over as well. So that'll just about leave room for that logo over there. We might have to make it a little bit bigger to give it a little bit of margin. We'll see.
Yeah, I usually like 2 pixels for a margin. But.
Yeah, I think we might want to do that, but when I look in images here, this might have a little bit of... Well, I can't tell on here. It might have a little bit of margin built in. Well, we'll see once we get it in there. We'll see what it looks like. hang on just a second. I'm going to look at my notes real quick here. Okay, cool. I think that's all we need to do. I mean, the text italicizes the H3 tagline, but I don't think we need to do that. Let's take a look at
I
some...
need to take a quick peek at the index HTML. I think I missed a line for the tagline bit.
So here's they are, line 16 and 18.
ID is equal to tagline. Well, that's what I've got, so I must have... there's the problem.
You got to call it with hash. Is that your problem?
No, I had a space in between tag and line, but I didn't have one in the ID, so...
Okay, so let's talk about that. That's a really good point. So let's say I do something like this. So what this actually means in HTML is that I'm giving two different values for ID. So I'm giving it an ID of tag and an ID of line as well. As far as I know, that's not allowed. You can do that with classes, definitely. You can add spaces between class names so you can give something multiple classes. So let's talk color on these guys here. So the textbook has you do a color of, and it gives you a hexadecimal value. So have you guys, in your coding, have you worked with hexadecimal values before? Okay.
Long time ago.
I have, yeah. Specifically for colors and stuff, and generally I just Google values, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know hexadecimals have various applications. This is the only way that I've ever used them is for colors. So first of all, let me just save and pop over to the browser, and there is our color. At least that's the color the textbook wants. So let's talk about what these mean. First of all, the 6 digits of hexadecimal, let's look at hex means, right? 6 digits. And if they're in pairs of 2, oops, I moved that over without meaning to. And the first pair is red, the second pair is green, and the third pair is blue. Okay, so there's part of the mystery taken out of it right there. You can see that I've got a higher value in the red, 80, and then zeros for the green and blue. So you know it's going to be some kind of red when you see that. Let me go back up to the big comment here. So the way hexadecimals work are the values of 1 through 9, or 0 through 9 actually. 0, 1, that's not a 1, that's a 1. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then if I want to get up to 10, I need to use 2 characters, right? Well, that's what they worked around. Instead of going to 10, you go to A. I guess I'll use lowercase a, b, c, d, e, f. So 0 through 9 and then A through F is really 0 through 15, or 1 through 16 if you prefer to think of it that way. So that's what those guys mean. So if I have something like C 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then I know that's going to be a brighter red because C is a higher value. Let's test it out. If I go over here, yeah, brighter red. If I go all the way up to F, brighter still. And I believe that the red, when we did color equals red right at the beginning, I believe that's going to be an FF, which is the brightest red that you can have, like that. So that's the way it works. So 80 is going to be a fairly dull, kind of maroonish red. If I put the 8 over here instead, it's in the middle of the 3 pairs, and so it's going to be green, RGB, right? And then if I put it on over here, it's going to be blue instead. Red, green, and blue, so it's the last one over there. So let's see what the blue looks like. The danger about using blue is that if it's a little bit too bright, it looks like a link color, right? So you got to watch out when you're using blue for much of anything. It should be a pretty dull blue if it's not going to be clickable. Even something like this, if I have black text and then this blue text, people might try to click on this, and that's a usability issue. For now, at least, I think I'm going to stick with what the textbook does, of using this kind of maroon color here. I don't know, we might change it, but for now, I'll just go ahead and stick with that because I don't have something better in mind. And then put that same thing for the tagline as well. Now for these, if you find a color that you like better, then I don't mind if you do that instead. That's perfectly fine. I just don't have an idea right now which one I want to use instead. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about another kind of color that you can use. You can use RGB values instead of just like the hexadecimal that we've got here. Let me take this color here, and I'm going to comment this line. Remember, you don't have a single line comment. I sure wish they would add one, but so far they haven't. And let's do RGB values. So if you do RGB values directly, then you have to type in RGB keyword followed by parentheses, and then you put the 3 values in here separated by commas. Now in this case, the RGB values go from 0 to 255, which is really what the hexadecimals do as well, 16 times 16. So if I did something like, I don't know exactly what that hexadecimal is, but it's going to be something like maybe, I don't know, let me try 150 to start with, and then comma, and then I know I've got 0 and 0 for green and blue. So yeah, it looks a little bit brighter than theirs. Maybe try 120.
It's going to be 160 because, well, no, 256, 128. Because if you're going up to 16 and 80, so you would be 128.
If this was 88, right? 88 would be halfway up. Is that right?
Out of
80.
15 or
Yeah.
16?
I don't know. My brain's breaking right now.
I think your RGB color is 128.
All right, let's try it. Let go. Thank you. So 128 is exactly halfway up. And it looks close enough to me. So whichever one you prefer. If you like the hexadecimal, go ahead and do that. I did this for years and years, and then I eventually got used to doing the RGB values instead. Whoops. So I'm going to use the RGB values, but really either way is fine. So there we go. Both of them are red. Groovy. We're done with the heading or the header for right now. Let's jump on to the main and the footer. So once again, remember our, let's see, do I want to go into that? Yeah, I think this is actually a good spot for it. Before we get into the main and footer, I'm going to show you one other kind of compound selector. Remember when we did like header H1, header H2? That's one kind of compound selector where you put spaces in between to show that one selector is inside the other selector in the HTML. It's nested inside of there. If you put a comma, that's like doing an and. So you can select.
Hey, Mr. Bispo.
Yes.
For the RGB, I wasn't able to get it to change into a color. It's just RGB and there's no color.
Okay, are you using the parentheses and the commas?
Yeah. Or are they, yeah, the parentheses.
And then 128, comma, 0, comma, 0, and you're using the RGB keyword at the beginning before the parentheses?
Right.
Are you putting a space before the open parenthesis? Because that'll break it.
No, there's no space.
Okay, remind me when we go to break, and I'll have you share screen and show me.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so let's see. The other kind of compound selector, you put a comma in between two selectors, and that means to select for both of those elements in your HTML. So for instance, there are some things that I'm formatting the same about both the site ID and the tagline, right? They both have a text indent of 80 pixels, and they both have a color of this RGB value, or the hexadecimal if I were using that. So refactoring seems like a good idea, even now. So if I do site ID, comma, hash tagline, I can take the text indent out of these guys and put it into here, and get rid of that one too. And then also this color property or declaration, get rid of that and put it into here. and save this, and no change here, right? So this is good for a number of reasons. I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware of the dry principle of coding, right? Don't repeat yourself. But also, it's just a matter of, like, it makes it more agile. If someone on my team goes, oh yeah, we need to change the text indent on those guys to make more room for the paragraph, or sorry, the logo, I don't have to do it twice, right? All I have to do is hunt down this one selector here, compound selector, and then change it there. So whenever you see something like that, as long as it doesn't break all of the organization in your CSS, it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and do that. Okay, cool. That's what I wanted to show you about another compound selector. There are other ones besides just those. There are plenty of them, actually. But so now let's go down to main and footer. We'll do several things, probably in quick succession here, and then we'll take a break and come back and finish up. So inside the main and footer, we were doing the compound selector of like header H2, so we could do header H1 and make sure that we're getting only the H1 that's inside the main element. I'm not sure that's really necessary because there's really only one H1 on the page, and that's a very common thing. If I look on the index.html, there's only one H1 here. Now, I personally usually use the H1 for the site ID, and then an H2 for the page name. But they're doing it the other way around, which I don't see that as being a problem. It's just a different approach. So this is like the page name right here. And that means that I don't want to have any other H1s on the page. Now, will it break if I do? No. You can have more than one H1 on the page. Back in HTML4, you couldn't. You could only have one H1 per page. And that's still considered generally good practice for SEO and so on. So I probably don't need to do anything else other than just H1. So I will just leave this as it is. Let's do the font size here. 150% since we're doing percentages. Go over here and it changed the size down to the same as those H2s in there. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but let's roll with it for right now. And then we can put that color line in there as well. Now, I'm not sure yet if I would want to include that up here. In fact, I probably would not because I don't want to put the text indent on there. So if I did this, if I did site ID tagline, and then, yeah, let's go ahead and throw the H1 in there too. Notice that that pushes this over the same amount, and I don't want to do that. That's only for the logo up here. So I will leave this as its own. Now, could I have another one, compound selector with those three selectors just for the color? Yeah, you could. Sometimes it gets a little bit crazy if you're trying to get that juggling about it. So I'll go ahead and leave it like this. So let's go for main H2. So the H2s, they're only inside the main element. And let's give them a font size of 130%, just like the H1. Wait a sec, no, the H1 is 150. Okay, so that's what's happening. Yeah, so the H1 is 150, but we're going to push those down a little bit further so we get our hierarchy back again. So once again, the H1 is now going to be a little bit bigger than those guys. Do main H3, another font size, 105%. So these are all taken from the textbook. There we go. So within these guys, it's just the type sizes and then the color for the H1 to match what's up in the heading there. Let's go ahead and do something for footer P. So again, just the paragraph that's inside the footer. It's not going to grab any of the paragraphs on the page because we're being more specific with our selector here. If I hover over that, it even gives me something about selector specificity here. So that's kind of cool. Now I'm going to put several font properties and a text property here. And then we're going to see if we can use that font shorthand, that font property. So I'm going to add a font family, a font style to make it italic, and a font size. to make it slightly smaller than the regular paragraphs on the page. So let's do these in this order. I'm going to do font family. And instead of doing the Georgia, let's do one based off the Verdana here. Except again, I think that we can be a little bit simpler these days and just do Verdana and sans serif. Let's see what that looks like. So this is all the Georgia, and then the Verdana here is a sans serif that was, again, like the Georgia, designed to be viewed on the screen through pixels. It's designed to work with pixels. I don't like it how when I select from that list, it doesn't give me a space there. It's irritating. Okay, font size. And this one, let's use ems instead of percentage. Now, if I were going to use percentage here, I would use, I guess, 80% if I wanted like 0.8 of the regular size here. So it'll make that text a little bit smaller than the regular paragraph text. Here's another way you can do it. The default type size is 1em, an EM. And so I could also do 0.8 em, and it'll do the same thing here. So if the percentages work better for you, then go ahead and just use the percentages, but I want to at least show you this. It kind of works the same way. Just think of 1em as equal to 100%, and then you can use decimals off of that, including ones above 1.0. And then let's see, what else? We have the font family, we have the font size, and let's do the font style. Italic. There we go. And I'm going to do a text, text align. And let's center this text. I usually don't want to do that with body copy because body copy that's centered is particularly difficult to read unless you were formatting, I don't know, poems or like a wedding invitation with a very small amount of text that's supposed to look nice and elegant and so on. Then yeah, maybe you'd use text align center, or sometimes if you just want to center something inside the footer like this.
It does really look odd without like actual defined borders. You know what I mean? Like boxes and like style design.
Absolutely. We're going to go there on Thursday. Okay, now I want to show you the font property here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to commentify these three lines. And I'm going to try to combine these into a single font property, which is font. Just font. And then you can combine all these together. Now, the first time I do this, it's not going to work. I'll let you know, because things need to be in a certain order. So if I do like Verdana, sans serif, space 0.8em, space italic. Okay, so Bispo said we should be able to combine these all into one font property. So I'm going to try it like that. And I'm going to save and go over here, and it breaks, right? This is back to the Georgia 1em, 100%, without the italic on there or anything. So it's got to be in a certain order. In particular, the font stack, which I think, I think this makes sense because you never know how long the font stack is going to be. That needs to go last. And in fact, I think that this is all we need to do. I think we just need to take the font stack and put it last. So yeah, font size and then italic for the font style and then the font stack, and boom. It works, but it's not doing the italic, so let's try the italic first here. There we go. So there's our order. I was thinking the other one was going to work, but it didn't. So the order does matter when you're doing this. It'll only work in a particular order. The important one is just to remember that this, which normally you would think of as putting first, it has to go last. And then the other ones, if you don't remember the order, as I don't often, you just juggle them around until they work, basically. But that's, if it doesn't work, that's probably what's happening. You need to change the order of it for that guy. And once having gotten that, if you want to, you can delete this. I'm going to leave it in there for my notes to remind myself that yes, this is a shorthand for all this stuff, and it does the same thing. Okay, I think it's about time for a little break. It's already 7:20, and as usual, I've gone a little bit over. When we come back, we will format the body copy. That'll be a piece of cake. And then we will do, let's format the links too. We've got some links in here. And let's format these. There's some things I don't like about them. I don't like the static link blue. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it really. It's just like we've seen it. I don't think the links need underlines. This is from the 80s, or not the 80s. This is from the 90s, right? When people needed the reinforcement of, oh yeah, it's blue, and oh yeah, it's underlined too. Oh, I guess that's a link, right? We don't need this anymore. I'm really kind of surprised that browsers even do it anymore. But so that's a couple of things, especially the underline. The other thing is, if I tap on a link and then once I've visited a link, it turns this purple color. I don't think visitors really need to be told when they've clicked a link and when they haven't. Now, if it's a really big sitemap, like, I don't know, some e-com sites or something like that, where it actually would be helpful to know, like, oh yeah, that's right, I've already looked at the Calphalon omelet pans. Something like that, then okay, fine. But as a default, I don't think that makes much sense. So we're going to change the color of both of those, and we'll get rid of the underline. We'll bring the underline back when the user hovers over the link. So no underline, and then they'll hover, and they'll get the underline. And those have to do with pseudo elements, pseudo selectors. And then, let's see, I think that's almost it. We'll do a text shadow, and then we'll have our first look at the background as a way of getting the logo in there, and then we will be done. So let me go ahead and stop the recording here.